My name is Rachel O'Brien. Today we will be looking at the concept of stereotyping and how it affects Indigenous peoples in Australia. I'll be using poetry to illustrate this concept, written and recited by Indigenous poet and advocate for Indigenous social justice, Stephen Oliver. To begin this presentation, I want to ask you a question. What are some of the things that you think of when you see this word? Do you think of this? Perhaps this. For some, they think of this. Then there are others who have a much greater platform to communicate their opinion on than most, who think of this. Some of these images displayed have represented a widely accepted sociological idea of what the word Aboriginal means and what being part of the Indigenous culture represents. This is known as stereotyping. Stereotyping in a sociological format creates the illusion of a singular identity, where one attribute of an individual characterises the entire population. And here in Australia, these false ideas of Indigenous people continue to marginalise and disempower. Common stereotypes associated with Indigenous Australians are expressed by Stephen Oliver in his poem Blackfella. They are perceived as drunk, homeless, illiterate and savage. Many Australians reduce themselves to accept this type of perception, that Aboriginal people are overall disadvantaged. Stephen Oliver highlights this general perception as the result of media transgressions and false representations of Aboriginal identity as a whole. And the evidence, quite frankly, speaks for itself. Various news articles and traditional texts portray Indigenous Australians as drug-wielding, unintelligent and not fit for our Western society. Through repetition, these stereotypes have become normal and natural. False stereotypes of Indigenous Australians have been rooted in a long and sustained history of racism. At the time of the British invasion, the legality of terra nullius relied on stereotypes. Identifying the Indigenous population as uncivilised is precisely what enabled the British Empire to decimate the land without a negotiated treaty. This primitive myth associated with Aboriginal culture resulted in the process of assimilation, integration and segregation. This simple and primitive stereotype is one that is still upheld by many today. These naturalised identities that are attributed to the Indigenous community have unfortunately filtered through to the education system. Most of the talk about Indigenous education falls into a deficit model, and some teachers assume Aboriginal students are lacking in some way. This stereotype has become ingrained within our profession, with low expectations resulting in labelling the Indigenous community as victims. Without recognising individual identity, we continue to impound the entire Indigenous community and assume every Aboriginal person is one in the same. This is a main point highlighted by Stephen Oliver in his poem. Here he endeavours to eradicate the stereotypes associated with Indigenous peoples.
I'm a black fella. Not a drunk, criminal, textbook, uneducated, unemployed, welfare dependent slack fella. And if you try to tell me different, then you might just get a smack fella. Not that I condone violence. I just don't condone silence. And when you try to tell me about what it means to be an Aborigine with your stupid ass jokes, stereotypes and Discovery Channel mentality, I'm afraid I have to speak up and let you know about me. It's about attitudes. It's about people who formulate their ill-informed views, who switch on the TV and then suddenly, out of the blue, they know all about me. Instead, they'll read articles, switch on the news, and somehow through media, the lies become truth. Just like when people see a drunk black man on the street and somehow from that black man becomes me.
Through this art form, Stephen Oliver explores his own identity, an Aboriginal identity, in comparison to the attitudes formulated by the wider community. Through negative portrayals in the media and overt expressions of racism from the powers that be, we could conclude that they're all the same. And therein lies the key message conveyed by Oliver.
Don't base your decisions on things that you see. Make up your mind by talking to me.
I feel as a pre-service teacher this is a powerful message to bring to the classroom. Deficit thinking creates an external benchmark for Indigenous children, and we as teachers need to be aware of these preconceived stereotypical ideas on how to teach Aboriginal kids. Therefore, I feel it is vital to respect and nurture individual identity. Respecting relationships is the cornerstone of working with Indigenous communities in education. I am a firm believer in promoting reconciliation in the classroom. And tackling these stereotypes means paying attention to the relationships built with individual students and their communities. This is crucial to any meaningful reconciliation in the future.